hi everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Shiva Rizvani. I'm one of the Capstone instructors. I'm going to be moderating this group. So we're currently in the session that we've labeled Interactive Installation and Art. I want to give a quick shout out and thank you to our reviewers. First off, we have Joanna Kelly. Joanna Kelly is the COO at Small Planet, where she helps teams create award-winning digital products for clients like Disney, NPD Group, and Planned Parenthood. Her work has earned the Communication Arts Magazine Award of Excellence and the Fast Company Innovation by Design Award, been featured on the App Store and Google Play, and been downloaded millions of times. Joanna has guest lectured at the School of Visual Arts and taught at Parsons New School for Design. She received her undergraduate degree from New York University and holds an MFA in Design and Technology from Parsons, the New School for Design as well. So Joanna, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. So we also have Alex Darby. Oh, sorry about that. Hi, Joanna. We also have Alex Darby. Alex is an organizational strategist, business advisor, and creative coach with over 15 years experience working with cultural organizations, small businesses, artists, and creative entrepreneurs. She's the founder of Darby Studios, specializing in organizational strategy and creative production for artists and creative professionals with a focus on the intersection of art and tech. Alex was previously Director of Strategic Operations at New Inc. At the New Museum of Contemporary Art, which is the New Museum's incubator for art, technology, and design. She's an entrepreneur, creative producer, and speculative jeweler. Alex was born and raised in Sydney, Australia, and now lives and works in New York. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. So I'd like to get started with the first group, so we'll just dive right in and then get feedback from our reviewers. First up, we have Project Wall.
Hello. Share my screen. Hello, everyone. My name is James, and my project is called Project Wall, aka Project Wall. So what is Project Wall? So Project Wall is a simulcast installation that allows people to figuratively break down a wall, and in the end, people on both sides of the wall can virtually interact with each other. So each side of a wall sets a Kinect sensor and a projection of a wall. The Kinect will detect when a user punches towards the wall, resulting in the projection wall being broken down. Once the wall is broken, the user will be able to see a live video feed of the Kinect at the opposite side of the wall. So why did I choose a wall? Well, a wall is a physical barrier that keeps people apart. It seems irremovable and imposes the feeling of fear and unknown. It has become the symbol of divide and separation. So Project Wall's aim is to break down the wall and create unity. So there are two inspirations for this project. One project is called the Teeter-Totter Wall by Ronald Rell in 2019. So this installation this installation briefly bridges the US-Mexican border with a seesaw linking kids in both countries. This project brings a sense of unity while also showing a physical representation of action on one side having direct consequences of the other. Another project is by Robin Bell. He is a projection artist, and he uses projection as a form of protest. So in this case, he projected messages onto Trump's hotel in 2017, right after the election. But both of these projects serve as the main inspiration for both my theme and the possibility of the interaction and projection with walls. So here I'm going to briefly show a demo of the project in action. So as you can see, as user one punches the wall, both users on each side of the wall will receive an update of the wall being broken. As the user continues to punch, the wall will eventually break, resulting in the ability for the users on each side of the wall to see and interact with each other. So with this project, it relies heavily on the Kinect sensor. Kinect has multiple crucial functionalities, and one of it is the feature to track objects in 3 dimensions. This feature is important for the gesture recognition to recognize a user punching a wall. as it can locate a hand that is in the fist and moving towards the wall. Another Connect feature is a built-in camera that can also be served as a webcam, which is needed to display a live video feed after the wall is broken down. So here's a punching demo during during my development process. So the main obstacle for this project is actually getting the accuracy for the gesture recognition. As people have different definitions of punches and different body types, it is very important for me and for this project to have multiple user tests to get as much data as possible in order to get an accurate gesture recognition. So as you can see on screen, this short clip of a user testing session, this is actually with my project advisor, Ian Hills, and the Connect is actually having trouble recognizing the punch. After some troubleshooting, it was discovered that the Connect was seeing too much motion blur to probably recognize the location of the hand and the hand state. But fortunately, with more user testing and some tweaking in the code, the gesture recognition accuracy is approximately 90%. So this is the current setup after a bunch of user testing, and this is what I find the most optimal. So here's a diagram of the space needed for both sides of the wall. So it is found that the Connect is at best, in this case, to be approximately 1 feet off the floor, with the user being approximately 8 feet away from the Connect. This will produce the most accurate gesture recognition for this project, while also have the benefit that if we use a ceiling mount projector, it won't interfere with the field of view of the Connect, therefore making a perfect ideal setup for this project. So once again, I'm gonna play the demo video of the project in action. This is just bring everything back together. So once again, as a user one punches the wall, both the user on each side of the wall will receive an update of the wall being broken. As the user continues to punch, the wall eventually breaks, resulting in the ability for users on each side of the wall to see each other and interact with each other. And thank you for your time.
Nice work. Thank you so much, James. So I'd like to throw it to our reviewers. Would either of you like to go first? Joanna, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. So first of all, I love this idea. I think it's really lovely to find a way to use technology to connect people. So I think that's very exciting. I guess my main question is, what is the ideal situation? Like, this has an ideal setup so that the Connect like recognizes things, so that the projections map a certain way. But the projects that you referenced, they're very location specific. So in order to actually have that impact of making people feel like they are connecting with somebody on the other side of a wall, where is sort of the space that you would ideally put this in? Like, is it meant to go in a gallery where it's sort of, it's actually kind of just a surprise that there is somebody on the other side of the wall? Or are you thinking that this should be more along the lines of sort of a protest piece and it should go out in the world somewhere, in which case like having the Connect and the projectors kind of makes things more complicated. So I'm kind of curious to know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so those are the thoughts I have in mind when producing the project. Initially, my main goal, well, when I initially pitched it, one of my main goals was mobility. So able to have this set up literally anywhere, ideally like anywhere with a wall, and then I can have a projector and have power and everything set up. Since everything is actually run on web-based, so theoretically speaking, it could be done through, for example, Wi-Fi or a LAN network. But obviously, with video feeds, there's always that problem of data transmission. So that's why I have kind of leaned into more of a gallery setting, like an installation in this case, because it reduces a bunch of unknown variables that mobility has a problem of facing.
Right.
So ideally speaking, for this project, I'm kind of leaning towards an installation where it's kind of like an experience that ideally is within a wall, and you're on opposite sides of the wall, and in a way it's a surprise because
Sure.
technically when you're breaking the wall, the other side can see the wall's breaking, so you will get a cue that should probably do something to trigger the wall being broken down. Was the idea.
Yeah, I think with that in mind, then I realized that the video is a demo, but going forward, I think creating a narrative in the demo, like showing how you would want somebody to feel during this experience would also be quite helpful. So if you were going to try to take this to a gallery space and say, like, this is a project that I want to install, and this is a thing, I'm an artist. I think making it more clear in the demo itself what it is that you want your users to feel. So it's like, why are you punching a wall? Like, punching a wall like is a pretty aggressive thing. How are you going to get them to do it? And then, like, as the wall's coming down, right now it kind of goes to black before the next feed flips on. So, like, can you reveal, like, what's on the other side as, like, one of the bricks comes down? Like, does it need to be a brick? Should the wall be made of something different? Just to kind of things to expand upon, to consider in the future. But I think all of those, taking it forward that way will make it even more compelling. But I think there's something there. So great job.
Thank you. I definitely agree. I do have some thought that I would like to take the next steps. It's just like with things going on right now was a bit difficult in certain aspects of testing. I do have thought like applying textures on the actual wall because all my demos on a TV screen, not actual projection, due to restrictions of equipment that I have in hand. Ideally speaking, like the final ideal project would be you can use any flat surface wall, and then when the wall cracks, it's just a texture being applied onto it, and then animation plays and stuff like that. Cool. But that requires a lot more testing equipment that I currently do not have, unfortunately.
Alex, you want to go?
Yeah. I have a couple of questions about that. So, you know, assuming the ideal location is a gallery, for example, is the idea that it's only two people, like one on each side of the wall? And is also the idea that both groups are in that same space? Because I think that would be something quite interesting about this being a participatory project that takes place in a multi-location kind of situation. So perhaps there's a physical installation in a gallery, and then perhaps there's some kind of, you know, a partnered gallery somewhere else, or a web-based thing where, like, people are actually kind of engaging with people that aren't necessarily, like, in their space or in their city or in, you know, in that kind of space. So I think thinking a little bit about some of the references that you had and the history of, you know, erecting walls, I think there's a lot more that you can kind of really play on there in terms of how you stage this and how you talk about the project. And on the technical side of things, what are you running this off of? Like, what program are you using?
So I didn't talk about it in detail. Obviously, it's in Connect, so I was using the Connect library that's provided. I'm actually running an open source library called Connectron to be able to run, to be able to connect multiple connects on a LAN network. So it can be technically in different locations as long as they're on the same network. I can grab a feed of the other connect. And then for the web-based stuff, it's using P5.js to display things.
Okay. I would do some research into how you might want to run this in in an installation environment. You might want to work with Max MSP, you might want to work with Touch Designer, like whatever you're more familiar with, because including the projections in this and mapping that along with the data that's coming from the Connect, like you're going to need to build that out. And I would say the diagram that you showed with the optimal connect distance, the next thing that I think you need to do is really take into consideration the projections, because right now you're talking about flat walls and projecting from overhead from behind, but if you're projecting through your audience, you're going to get shadow. So you need to think about the relationship between that. You might want to think about something that's rear projected from the inside of the wall onto two screens from so that you're not dealing with that that thing. And then I guess just thinking through the like one person, multi-person reality and how many more connects you might need to kind of cover field of view in that case. You could potentially also work with overhead. The newer connects that Azure have quite a significant field of view, like increased field of view over the current version that you're using. And so you can capture more people in space depending on whether you intend this to be a single user interaction or you want multiple people in the room. So just a couple of like technical considerations to think through that, but I really like the concept and I think it's really interesting, and I think this would be very compelling in a kind of in an exhibition environment. And I think it's really nice usage of the technology in a way that isn't just kind of dumb tech for the sake of it. So I think this is pretty creative.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Well done, James. Nice job. So next up, we have Mesa Verde Living Dioramas. Madeline, would you like to take over?
Yes, that's me. Okay, I'm gonna start my screen share. Alrighty. Hello, my name is Madeline LeMay. I'm a technology, arts, and media senior, and my capstone project was to design a new exhibit for the Mesa Verde National Park. The project started when Chapin Mesa Archaeological Museum, a small museum in southwestern Colorado, reached out to CU Boulder for help with a new renovation. They had a PR problem. The museum was installed in the 1930s, and it was historic in and of its own right. But the contents of the museum had barely changed since its opening. Visitors said it was like being in a museum about how museums were in the 1930s. And along with the original displays, some of the questionable views towards indigenous folks were also being preserved. The biggest area of conflict was an exhibit that park officials jokingly called their famous dioramas. Massive, beautifully detailed, and made by skilled artisans during the Great Depression, the 5 dioramas were easily the most popular exhibit in the museum. But the problem is, these dioramas flew in the face of all that archaeologists have learned about ancestral Puebloans in the last 100 years. And most importantly, it disrespects a living culture's own self-conception. These depictions of ancestral Puebloans are at odds with the increasing involvement of indigenous peoples in the park system, who demand greater humanization for their foremothers. They came to see you with a design question. How do I convey humanization in a museum full of inanimate objects? But they were also asking a moral question. Which stories do we tell? And who gets to tell them? This was harder than you might think. In theory, curation falls evenly to 3 groups: the US National Park System, who owns the land, the archaeological community, who uses the land, and the 26 native groups who claim descendancy from Mesa Verde. But it's clear in this case that equality is not equity. One of these groups, after all, wasn't included in the discussion for the first iteration of content, and is by far the most affected by the public's misconception of Native Americans. And each group has its own history to share with the museum, and each is vying for a place in the minds of the American public. There's currently talk about repatriating some of the thousands upon, or hundreds upon thousands of mundane and ceremonial objects in the museums, and a feeling that technology could fill the gap where artifacts could not. My original project intent was to overlay the natural, cultural, and archaeological histories of Mesa Verde, and to do it in a way that would educate the general public about this debate. In short, I wanted to make the most divisive part of the museum into its best opportunity for discussion. The way I wanted to convey this concept graphically was to literally overlay our 2020 conception of life on Mesa Verde right over the 1931. as if to say we are constantly reconceptualizing history. Keeping the 1930s dioramas untouched, I wanted to propose a new digital diorama made with native input that could be projected right onto the glass. Looking into precedents from around the world, I found many examples where projections were used to spruce up old exhibits. Projections are attractive to old museums because they transform a place without destroying what's already there. It's attractive to small museums because it doesn't take up any space, nor is it that expensive to keep up in the long run. In Colorado, small and medium-sized museums are starting to grow into their role as curators of an immersive experience with history, carefully selecting the artifacts on display and telling a story. They are recognizing that native input is essential to creating authentic experience. I went into this knowing that despite my many hours of research, I wouldn't have the skills of a professional technologist or the innate cultural understanding of a Pueblo descendant. But I could give the museum a great place to start and a proof of concept that they need to invest in the project. My project is step one in a 5-year process of deciding what should be included in the museum. A renovation that will likely stay for 100 more years after I'm finished. The project will pass through many hands in its lifetime. Despite my entire work spanning the ideation and proposal stage of the project, I began to realize that I'd have to ideate the content as well as the technical prototypes. In the beginning, most people didn't understand what I was trying to do. Museum professionals needed help imagining what projections like mine could teach people and how they would work and what resources it would take to make it a permanent installation. If they decided to continue with the project, I decided that they would probably use animation. I went through a lot of variations and stylizations of animation. Did I want 2D or 3D, stylized or realistic? This was an original concept art for the animations, and I went way far from this. I got feedback from archaeologists to be detailed. The tribal representatives agreed. The faults of the original were in the details. There we go. I was advised to spend extra time on the elaborate textiles that Mesa Verdeans wore, since they were absent from the original dioramas, to show real artifacts from the museum in their original use. I attended 2 archaeology summits, read dozens of books and papers, and skimmed museum collections for the right details, the right events to depict. I extrapolated skin color and facial features from modern descendants and worked backwards from 1,000-year-old scraps of fabric to create plausible ancient styles. Here's what I've come up with in the 15-week period. As you can see here, I've been able to create a variety of characters, some of which are young and some of which are old. They all have their own clothing used with the classic materials of the region, including cotton, some of it homespun and some of it imported from Mexico. The characteristic patterns of the pottery and fabric of the area, and turkey downs and other textiles. As you can see, I created animations to show how this could be making a living diorama. Here's a woman walking with a pot on her head, which was in the original diorama, but this time she has clothing, historically accurate clothing, and she has expression. She even, at one point, oh, it already happened, but almost drops the pot, and that adds some humor to something that would have been kind of, you know, not as humorous in the first place. Here's it all added together. And here is, I actually have the contraption behind me, but here's the kind of little sample diorama I set up in my own house. it was a true journey to get where I am with this project, and I approached it with all the tenacity, conscientiousness, and unhealthy attention to detail that I have in me. I hope you are happy with it just like I am. Thank you so much.
Nice work, Madeline. Thank you. Well done.
Yeah, and if you want, I do have my little diorama behind me here, so I can, while you guys tell me feedback, I can set it up to show you what it's doing.
Great.
Okay.
And Madeline, if you unshare your screen, then we might be able to see that a little bit better. Perfect. Great.
Yeah.
So, Joanna, Alex, would either of you like to go first?
There we go. Is it in the background right now?
Yes.
I can go if you want to switch it up.
Yeah, go ahead.
You can really see it with the
Yeah. I think this is a really fascinating project. I think that it is. I think what you've done is really wonderful, and I suppose my main feedback is about your presentation more than the work itself, because I think you really kind of left all of the like meat of that towards the end, because I spent the first few slides kind of being like, not 100% sure what we're talking about yet. And even though, you know, I knew what you were doing, but when I saw what you did, like I would lead with that. Like, here's what I did, and then you can kind of like get into the details of why that's important and the process that you went through. But I think in general, like that's really strong, and I want to kind of see that front loaded if you're presenting this or if you're talking about this work. I mean, I think otherwise, you know, you seem to have responded quite well to the necessary kind of inclusivity and sensitivity that is deep within this project and the nature of this kind of work. I would also love to hear a little bit more about what that actual process was like and how you were involved with working with the museum, how you're involved with working with Native groups in this process. So kind of just like uncovering a little more about that, because I think that would be, you know, coming into this and asking that question of whose information, who gets to curate, I think is extremely important. But I maybe want to hear a little bit more about exactly what that looked like, because I think you're asking the question, but I want to learn more, and I want to understand a little more about that. But I think the visualization is great. I think it's a really elegant solution. I would also like to understand a little bit more about how exactly without knowing the museum or what the installations in the museum currently look like, I'd love to see just what that is, or I'd love to hear what that looks like. And maybe, you know, just like one more fill in the blanks about how your solution solves for it in the real environment. Which obviously, I mean, I'd love to just hear you share that now, but I think, you know, again, in presenting this, I'd love to see that kind of like comparative between like what it currently is and what it's going to be.
Yes. Yeah, I can speak to some of the inclusivity and the kind of process right now. You guys probably heard from my speech that I'm in kind of a strange, unique situation where I signed up for this project because it was something that I could do technically, you know, it was a expertise of mine to be able to kind of combine the artistic and the I guess like technological aspects of this project. But yeah, I consulted many experts throughout this process, and ultimately my recommendation is to pass this project on to an animator from the Native community that that would be able to put their own spin on it. This is kind of the visualization at the beginning that people can see, oh, okay, this is possible, but I am working with the museum to try to find someone new to actually make the artwork possible right now. Yeah.
That's great.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I don't know what was your other question? You wanted to share?
It's kind of more of a comment, I think, because it's hard to illustrate now, but as someone who's not personally familiar with the museum space that you're referring to, I would have liked to see like you know, this is what the dioramas, you know, not in extreme detail, like more like in situ, what do they look like in the space, so that I can more easily visualize like exactly how your solution will play out in their space.
Okay, yeah, next time we present that, I will be sure to include.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's really creative. I think it's really detailed, and I think it's a really nice, entertaining and novel solution. It's really great.
Okay, thank you.
And we have maybe a minute or two, if Joanna, if you wanted to add a little bit.
Sure. I love this, and I thought your presentation was great. I have a few friends who are museum professionals, and the challenges that they face regularly in terms of having to deal with cost while telling, you know, the true story, or the story that people need to understand, and giving the appropriate context while still you know, dealing with the normal restraints of running a museum. There's a lot there. So I really appreciate the context that you provide, and that you consider cost and you know, size of museums, and just sort of all of those like different pieces. Something that I'd be curious to know more about, and I think Alex mentioned this, is just more around kind of the teams that are required to do all of this. Like, I'm really impressed by all the stuff that you did by yourself. Like, normally, you know, if a museum had a budget, they'd hire an agency to do something like this. You know, they'd show up and be like, we have this really old exhibition and it's like pretty offensive. We don't want to scrap it. How can we make it cool while acknowledging that we were wrong without actually getting it, you know, torn to pieces? And that you kind of took this on is just awesome. So yeah, great work.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, great job, Madeline. Well done. Thank you. Next up, we have Storytelling Campfire. Albert, if you'd like to take over, you can go ahead.
I can't hear anything. Albert, are you on mute?
Albert, you were muted. Go ahead one more time.
Sorry, can you hear me right now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, hi, my name is Albert, and then today I'm going to talk about my capstone project, Storytelling Campfire. I'm very glad Madeline went first, because we are working on the same client, and then she gives all the big picture first, so I can dive into the project directly. So the goal for this project is to create an immersive interaction installations for the Chippa Mesa Archaeological Museum that let the visitor learn the history of indigenous people from their perspective. And after some framing interview for people that work with the museum and visitors to the museums, I learned that the Chippa Mesa Museum doesn't have many interactive learning devices to improve the visitor experience. And secondly, the most auspicious stories from the museum were from the explorer's point of view from the 1930s. And thirdly, it is very hard to find a way to illustrate indigenous history along with the museum full of archaeological findings without bias. And then I went on to the brainstorm stage and think of different ideas that I can probably give for the museums. And very firstly, I come up with a virtual reality headsets for the museums, which with the virtual reality contents and allow the visitor to experience some space and area that they have restrictions to go to due to either weather condition or preservation purpose. And secondly, to create a storytelling piece around the virtual campfires and tell the stories from native people with oral-based content. And thirdly is to rearrange the auditorium space and to make it more attracting to the visitors. And with those ideas in mind, I went on to initial research. And I learned that the museum wants to have something that can be easily to deal with for the staffs, not too tech savvy and can be easily fixed, and also can be last for a very long period of time. Another things I found out is many people come into the museums thinking there are only one tribe living in the Mesa Verde areas, but actually there are 26 tribes living in that areas. And it is very, very hard to find a material or story content that's representative enough without conflicting others to put in the museums. Another interesting finding is I learned probably people in Mesa Verde create kiva, which is a spiritual center with a fire pit in the center. And then this is the place they hold their traditional rites, and also the younger generation for their people learn the stories and culture from elder generation in that space. So I think it's very intriguing to go on to the idea of storytelling campfire. And then I went on to the model prototypes for this project. First of all, I drew out the ideas on a piece of paper, and then in my ideas, the pitching is to have a dome structure on top and have projection of starry nights on the top to create the very immersive ambience for the visitors, and also have a sense of connection to the nature. Underneath that is going to be a capstone, campfire with this, sonic sensors, which sense the motion of the visitor around them. And when the visitor come by the campfire will light up. And also there are 4 sensor cushions around the campfire, and people can sit on the cushion, and then it will trigger the story to play for the device. Later on, I went to sketch a model to do different modeling for this project and then see how it's going to be look like. And then I also get the sketch file for the museum, and then I can place my model in the museum and see how the space will fit and how people likely to interact with the device. And after deeper research into this project, I learned that the auditorium space in the museums, which is quite big, but actually there are video playing in the auditoriums. So the audio from the video is actually going to be interfere with oral content from my project. And then I was advised to place this in separate rooms of these museums. And then after visiting this space, this is actually the rooms that's under renovation right now. And that's the corner that I would suggest to put, and I think it's compelling, with a 6 by 6 feet space that I can put for my project. And I rearranged the entire things, and then I put my new model with 6 feet diameter dome structure for this device in that corner, and this is what it looked like. Next thing is to build the domes. Due to the limitation of the budget, so I choose to use in cardboard, which is fairly cheap, and then to build a geodesic dome. And I'm very glad that the Atlas building has the laser cutter. The size is big enough to cut on the cardboard that allows me to build the 6 feet diameter domes. And this is the process that I put all the cardboard pieces together, and this is the dome structure that I have. And then I managed to hang the dome over underneath the ceiling around the time the campus closed. Another approach for this project is to make the hardware. And I choose to use Arduino as the microcontrollers. And then here you can see the 4 sensors, sonic sensors, and also the LED strip for this project. And I put them in series, so it can be code for multiple user for the exhibitions. And also try to using Papa Sound board for the storytellings, but it's turned out to be the audio quality, it wasn't quite great. So I went on to the Max, which is recommended by my class advisor, Matt, to use my computer to play the audios for this project. And for the audio piece, I use Logic Pro to process all the voice recording from different people, and also putting the background music from Ava for this audios to work. And I put everything into Max, and this is what it looked like with the hardwares. And then it's also very important to figure out the projections. I'm very lucky to get connections to the fixed planetariums from at CU Boulder. They have the planetarium with all different kind of projector. It's very lovely to see. And this one particular one you're seeing is convex mirror lens projections. And then the other option is the fisheye link projections, as you can see over here. The advantage to using fisheye link projector is it doesn't take up the corner of the dome structure, and it can place in the center, which save a lot of space and doesn't seem too disruptive. And this is the projector that I plan to use for this project. And later on, I go on to the Fusion 360 to go on to the enclosure design, come up with 2 different type of options for this enclosure. Due to the limitation size that I have for dome structures, I choose the box size, which is smaller and more compact for this project. And this is what it look like with the fisheye link projector with an enclosure on. The next step is to add the fire lock and then the NeoPixel strips to make a more realistic look. And with all those pieces combined, it turned into this campfire that tells a story. And that's it. For this project, I need to use special thanks to all those people who have been supporting me so much for this project. And thank you so much for listening to this presentation.
Nice work, Albert. Thank you. Well done. Joanna, would you like to go first?
Sure. So I love this idea. I think it's really nice. I think I'd love to know a little bit more about, I guess, how the museum felt about it, or what their feedback was, or if you've sort of gotten to that point, just to have a little bit more context around it. Like, is it a permanent installation? Like, is it okay that you're taking over that corner? Does it affect flow of traffic? Like, sort of some of that stuff to consider. That aside, also understanding a little bit more about the audio itself. Like, does each person listen to a different story, or is it the same story? Where does the sound come from? The dome is beautiful. I love the idea of having that projection. If it's right next to that window in the corner, does that affect kind of how that experience plays out? They're just like little nitty-gritty things that I want to know a little bit more about. But I think the concept itself is really great. Yeah, just like lots of little questions.
Those are very good questions. For feedback from museums, it's kind of unfortunate because due to the COVID-19, I kind of don't have much user testing feedback from
Sure.
the users, and also it's hard to get touch to the museum and see what they would like to see for this project.
Mm-hmm.
And for the audios, all the visitors that sit on the cushion going to be only listen to one story at a time, and then all the story will be playing in an order. Like, for example, if A sit on the cushion and then B sit on the cushion, it will play the story 1 first and then play the story 2. It will not interfere or cut off the first story. So if that answers your questions. And then I don't think the particular installation will cut off the flow, because the corner I put on is 6 by 6 feet, and then the dome structure is 6 feet in diameters. So it shouldn't be interfere with the flow too much. And then for the light, it is an issue for the projections. And then I think if to make them work better, maybe with curtains for that rooms to make it darker, probably won't make it better.
Yeah, it would definitely make it feel more intimate, and it is a very intimate experience, which is lovely. The other thing that I think would be helpful is understanding where the context for the campfire comes in. Like, is it something that, you know, a museum visitor would sort of walk in and then be like, what is this? And you sit down and part of the story kind of explains what it is. Is there like a plaque outside? Like, I'm just curious a little bit more about that context. Don't necessarily have to have that all figured out. And I will also let Alex speak.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joanna. Alex, about 3-4 minutes.
Okay. This is really great. I think, you know, I have like a one side and the other on the 6 by 6 feet thing. One, like, when you first said that, I was like, how are you possibly going to make this work in a 6x6 foot box? So congratulations for working within that like extremely limited parameter for what you're trying to do and building a working prototype that works within that. I think that's really amazing. I do think, however, that in reality, the installation of what you're trying to talk about, which is this moment of gathering and this kind of organic way that visitors might happen upon this in the environment, that it being in a corner is like maybe not the best location for it. And I think, you know, if this is something that you're kind of continuing with, I would push back on the museum's selected location, because I think it would have a lot more benefit to their audience for people to just be able to come across it. So even if it's like in a more public space for less time, or it's less permanent in that way, like having that be able to be viewed in the round and people just come and sit would be amazing. And just to clarify, when they're sitting, there's a sensor that's triggering the stories. Is that right?
Yes, it will not play. Yeah. There's no one sitting on the cushion.
Right. I would say that I don't know how much testing you've done with the sensors, but just be thinking through how sensitive some of these things can be in a repeat environment. So if someone's sitting on that constantly over and over and over again, just, you know, kind of being aware of that from a technical point of view, if this is really going to be installed. I did have a question about the content, and I'm not sure if you mentioned it and I missed it, but the stories themselves, who's telling them? And where are they coming from, and how is that being selected? Is this content that the museum already has?
So this is a very good question. For right now, all the stories I have is from a friend of mine I met in a club, and then she wrote all the story for me. And just for the sake of proof of concept, currently I just want to be, this is open to the museum. So the museum at the end have the rights to choose what story to put. They can either choose for first 2 months we'll be playing the story from this tribe, and then for the second month or third month we'll play story from the other tribe. Just make it seasonal changes, or just do different the story that they collect that they want to show to the visitor. But right now it's very hard to find a representative story from people that live in that area. So I just come up with generic stories that everyone.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine that the ability to create or source this from the museum is good, and I like the idea that there's a rotational possibility. But I would just say one thing for consideration with, you know, this specific project, and I think this applies to museums in general and interactive projects, is that, you know, the system that you've built to create this prototype is amazing, and I think it's great. You know, Max MSP is probably beyond any museum staff's capability. So I think also the kind of like level up for you is to think about how you can bulletproof the system to make it like completely dumb. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but I just mean make the system very simple. It's a kind of like turn this on, press play on this, enter 1 here, or whatever it is. But like things like Max can be very convoluted to troubleshoot over time. So when you're building things like this, and, you know, I love the idea that you're proposing something where they can change out the content long term, but they also said like zero tech fluency of their staff is like a priority. So just something to think about there in terms of sometimes the tools are available to us as, you know, people that are creative technologists or working in this way are the best way to solve the problem, but sometimes it's not the only way to solve it for every involved party. So I think this is amazing, and great job on the prototype. It's really great.
Thank you so much for all those great advice.
Sure, Albert. Yeah, thank you so much. Well done. Next up, we have the project Grove. Abby, you can go ahead and take over.
All right. Hello. Let me share my screen real quick. All right, so my project is called Grove. So my name is Abby Reinerson. I'm a senior double majoring in TAM and anthropology, and I am planning to graduate this coming May. All right, so Grove. Grove is the idea of a collection of portraits that are illustrated, then laser etched onto pine wood, designed to convey the individuality of each individual in a hanging grove, sort of grove installation. So in terms of influences and research, I was influenced a lot by visual art like woodcut art, printmaking, just art in general with lots of line work, and also by Blaschko lines, as you can see in the top left. That's a diagram of the normal cell development it forms in these lines along the body, and so that's a diagram. So I wanted to include something along those lines. And then in terms of the installation, I was influenced a lot by Alexander Calder. So you can see in the bottom left, that's one of his installations. And the overall goal of this project was to tell a story through wood. And so I was influenced a lot just in general by art forms that use wood as a medium, just like sculptures, even books, actually, just literal stories. And so that's what I was trying to achieve in this project. So here are some of my prototypes and the process that I went through. So I explored lots of different styles and methods. The one on the left is my first prototype, and as you can see, it's a bit too deep in the etching, and so I used this process to really narrow down the style I was looking for, as well as the details in terms of depth and speed that I wanted the laser cutter to use. And then here are two more examples of illustrations that I was using that I considered to use, but then the one on the left is a bit too simple, and the one on the right seems a bit too complex with line work, so I tried to find somewhere in between. And then here we have the some of the final portraits that I used as references for the illustrations. And originally I wanted to take portraits that used a completely black background as seen in the middle. But as I did this more often, I found that it sort of restricted the images and the characteristics in different pictures that I was trying to go for. So I just opened it up to any type of portrait, really. Here are some more of the portraits, and I found ideally for the illustrations, lots of contrast in the face made it a lot easier to find shadows for the lines that you will see in a second. And as for the people in the photos, some of them are people in my life and some of them are just people passing through. I wanted it just to be an overall look into my life, so some of them I know well and some of them I don't. So then here we have the final illustrations, some of them at least. And so I began by finding good contours in the faces and then posterizing the original portraits in Photoshop to help define shadows and highlights, which I would then try to emphasize with the lines. All right, here are some more. And again, I found that the more shadows, the more completely black areas there were, it was more of an appealing image, which I also found would be more useful when I transferred them onto wood. All right, so the overall goal and the reason that I wanted to use wood is that I wanted to show modern techniques used on an ancient medium to tell a story. So wood is this organic material, and I wanted to use that to portray the organic aspects of the people in the portraits as well. I wanted to show the life in more than one way. So these living people in my life transferred onto this once living material to sort of create this grove and to create an installation for people to take a walk through my life. All right, so here is one of the final wood planks. This is actually the only piece that I was able to actually get laser cut before I relocated. And as you can see, I chose pine in particular because you can still see the rings of the tree in the shadows. And there's a bit of singeing on the edge, which I think really helps to create depth. All right, so then here is a process video. I'm going to speed it up a little bit. Oops. But here you can just see the process I used. So I took the original image and would outline it, find all the details, and then posterize the image, find the contours, shadows, everything like that, and then create line work throughout the image. And after I had the lines, I would use the posterized image to emphasize details and highlights and so forth. I'm going to fast forward a little bit here. So this was the one piece that I actually got to the laser cutter. So I have an example of this one on wood, and then this at the end is me trying to recreate it digitally to look somewhat similar to what the actual piece of wood looks like. All right, and then here's another process, a video of just another individual. And as you can see, it's a similar process, but each one was different in their own way. And I found that the younger the individual, it was easier to find contours. And so that brought up a few challenges here and there with different subjects. But overall, this is the same process, which ends in a mock-up of what the wood plank would look like. All right, so then here are all the mock-ups of the wood planks that I would have ideally gotten from the laser cutter. And so as you can see, each one has an individual wood background. So I did end up buying all the planks that I was going to bring to the laser cutter, but obviously didn't get that far. So I photographed each one and tried to hand pick each plank to suit each illustration. All right, so here are some more of the illustrations, and I just found that this overall project was really interesting. I think that the illustrations themselves are versatile, and I chose to put them on wood, but they can be etched onto pretty much any material, and I think that's the unique thing about digital art in general. And then here is my mock-up of what the installation would ideally look something like. They would all be anchored at the ceiling in a sort of floating grove, so that my viewers and the audience could walk through and take a look through my walk through my life. But that's it. Thank you.
Nice work. Thank you. Well done. All right, Alex, would you like to go first?
Sure. I would.
Sorry, jump in real quick. We have 5 minutes total for feedback right now.
Okay. I would love to understand a little more about the purpose and kind of, you said right at the end there that it's going to be an installation. I'm not sure if I missed it, but it was very unclear to me from the beginning, like if that's how this is going to be situated or displayed, or like what the kind of end home for this work is. So I would just love to hear a little more about how you imagine this living in space, like beyond the process. And I really appreciate like the level of detail on the process. And I think that you went through a lot of like prototyping, and that's great. But I would love to hear a little bit more about how it's shown. So I guess it sounds like it's an exhibition. It's an installation.
Yeah. Sorry if I didn't mention that at the beginning. So the resulting product would ideally have been an installation of hanging portraits. So I wanted to create some sort of like grove to like emulate a forest kind of deal. That's partially the reason I wanted to use wood. So it was just some sort of interactive installation where people could walk through as if they were walking through a forest almost.
I would encourage you to think too about that relationship there, because you talked a lot about the kind of the marriage of digital art and kind of new technology with more like historical materials, and I would dive into that more. So what type of forest, where is it from, what is the wood that you're using, can you use that as like a kind of additional way to contextualize this work. And then I would also kind of encourage you to expand that to like, who are these people? What are the relationships? What's the narrative of the forest? Because I think there's, like, you mentioned a lot of these little pieces that kind of like sparked something, but I think that you can make the connective tissue between each of those aspects of it even more so. So it's like, who are the people and how are they related? How does that potentially relate back to, you know, the process that you've gone through, or the value of this technology that you have access to now versus the kind of like historical reality or some kind of history about the type of forest or the type of wood, or, you know, I encourage you to dig a little deeper into some of those like material relationships or personal relationships and ways that you can kind of connect them, so that people are really, when they're experiencing this, feeling this kind of strong narrative about what they're walking through, what they're walking into. But I love the kind of the level of detail and process that you've gone through to kind of get these portraits to where that you want them to be. And I just encourage you to kind of like go that little bit further in thinking about the installation. But great job.
Awesome, thank you.
Joanna, if you'd like to go ahead.
Sure. So yeah, I have similar feedback. I think there's so much going on that's really that's well executed. I love that you explored so much how to get the images that you wanted. What I find almost troubling is that at some point you said any type of portrait, which is like mind-blowing to me. It's like you've discovered how to take a photograph and you're like, great, photographs, whatever. But what's important about capturing those images is the people. Why are you choosing people? Why are they all happy? Is everyone in your life super happy? Why should we be walking through your life? If it's a grove, why is it hanging from the ceiling? Like, I want to know all of these things. I feel like you've captured like the tip of the iceberg and you've done sort of the hard part of understanding how you want to execute it. But I don't know any of the stuff that is like beneath the surface that gets at like what your artist statement is. Like, what is it that compels you to actually like capture these portraits, and what is it that makes you want people to know you this way? And that's the really fun, meaty part. So I hope to learn more about that at some point and see it installed.
Awesome, thank you.
Nice work, Abby. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Done. All right, next up we have Flow Room. Nate and Elsa, you guys can go ahead and take over.
All right, sweet. Sharing my screen here.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Elsa Raber, and this is Nate Bennett, and our capstone project is Flow Room.
So we came up with this project because in our modern world, things like work and school responsibilities, constant notifications from technology, and our task-oriented lifestyles can all lead to high stress levels and little space for quiet and reflection. Using the magic of physical computing, we wanted to create an immersive, nature-based space for people to de-stress right in the heart of our college campus.
So we're going to give you a quick 1-minute step through of the Flow Room experience. Don't worry, there's no audio to this video, but we just wanted to show you. First, you'll insert your phone into the phone slot, and that allows the rest of the room to become active. Then you'll move over to our control panel and use our tangible interface to interact with the stones. Each stone triggers a different natural environment to transform Flow Room. As you're experimenting with the 5 different habitats, you can learn and feel which one feels best to you. Once you find the environment that feels best, you can relax, meditate, breathe to our projected visualizations, listen to the nature soundscapes that we have playing in the room, and just take the time and space that you need. And then when you feel your time has concluded, you simply remove your phone from the slot to power down the room and exit. And so that is pretty much the basic progression of the flow room experience. We just wanted to give you all a visual context of putting your phone in the slot, experimenting with the pebbles, feeling the transitions, and what it looks like to finish the flow room experience.
So our inspiration from the phone slot came from an immersive indoor forest installation by Rachel Hovnanian, which required participants to leave their phones outside before they entered the exhibit. We designed the phone slot because we wanted users to complete an intentional action of giving up their phone to activate the rest of the flow room experience. And this act of phone sacrifice prevents distractions and notifications from getting in the way of the user's relaxation. You can see in the top right photo a cardboard prototype for our phone slot. Early in our design process, we made a lot of these low fidelity prototypes for all of our enclosures because we wanted to make sure that our users knew what to do with them and that all the interactions made sense. And then for our final implementation, we used wood and paint to construct more refined, polished enclosures. Once we were done constructing the phone slot and its pedestal, we positioned it right next to the entrance of the room so that's the first thing the user sees right when they walk in and they know what the first thing to do is.
So our control panel is a tangible interface that allows the user to control the elements of flow room while still maintaining our natural and non-computerized feel of the space. The stones were modeled after river rocks, each with a soothing texture and weight that encloses our RFID tags that signal the room changes. And for the panel itself is constructed out of wood, paint, and it houses our Arduino, RFID reader, and NeoPixels for visual feedback. And if you notice the painted symbols on each of the stones, those symbolize which habitat is actuated when the pebble is scanned.
We wanted the different environments to trigger big, immersive changes for the room. So for each individual environment, the lighting systems and the ambient sounds all transition together. If you check out our longer documentation video or actually see the room in person, you'll hear the sounds of rain and thunder, birds singing, a forest stream, waves on the beach, or a crackling campfire, depending on which environment you've chosen. In addition, all of the colors involved are based on color psychology and which colors are the most soothing for humans.
Our projected visualizations were made using P5.js, a JavaScript library for creative visual programming. It was challenging to create visually mesmerizing fractal patterns that recursed and also moved and also responded real time to color changes in flow room. So this process took a lot of user testing, which was actually really informative to find out what people found was engaging versus boring, predictable seeming versus random, and to actually hear the emotion words that people would use when getting to change the colors of the visuals. Overall, this process took a lot of time and math, but thankfully P5 has great documentation online that ultimately helped us learn how to make our 5-minute animation that we finished with.
So when it came time to put everything together, we wanted to be really intentional about how we designed the space within Flow Room. We didn't want people to feel like they were walking into a meeting room or a workspace in the Atlas building. Instead, our vision was to transform the room into a cave-like area that invokes wonder and awe from our users. We constructed the walls using wire netting and butcher paper, and we curved the sides of the walls inward and formed a dome ceiling to create a more organic and sacred place. During the construction process, we also mounted LEDs behind the paper walls to diffuse the light all the way throughout the room, and we hid away as much of our technology as possible. A lot of the inspiration from this room actually came from sensory deprivation tanks, which are designed to include only the most essential elements and strip away anything that might be distracting to the participant. We didn't want anything distracting or overstimulating that could detract from the user's experience as they take time to breathe, meditate, or just relax during their time in Flow Room.
So here's one final photo of the overall layout of our Flow Room space, showing the configuration of the different elements we just talked about. The cushion that was in the video was removed for this photo. Anyways, it shows the curvature of the space as well as the texture of the walls with all of the lights turned off and everything. And then the picture on the right is our system. These are all of the elements that we had communicating with each other to make the flow room experience what it was, and more importantly, a capstone project that we are truly proud of. And thank you all so much.
Nice job, guys. Thank you. Well done. Joanna, would you like to start this time?
Sure. So I'm so sorry if I missed this, but would you guys please tell me again who this room is for?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, you go.
This room is on CU campus, so it's for primarily people that are existing there, and so it's available for them to go take some time for themselves, and it is an individual experience, so people have to do it one at a time. But
okay, is there a time limit?
There's not a time limit. The visualization that we have is 5 minutes long, and all of the soundscapes are like 10 minutes long, but each of them are programmed to basically fade back and loop after they're done in a way that shouldn't be disruptive to the user. So we were kind of envisioning like a target time of like 5 to 10 minutes for people to go in and experience this room, but it can really be, we want it to be like as long as feels good for you and as long as you need, basically. So everything is set up to kind of be sustainable and regenerate.
So I love the idea of this room. I have experienced a similar room like this at a conference, and it was massive, and it was very low lighting. There were very clear rules. No one was really allowed to talk. You could keep your phone, so people would just like text. There was a lot of napping, and there were a lot of comfy places to sit. So how somebody like hangs out in there is something that I'd want to explore a little bit more. The benefit of having only space, or like have it be one person at a time, in terms of like the context of all of the people who might benefit from it, is something that I would want to like poke at a little bit more. And if it is sort of one at a time, like making it clear, like you shouldn't fall asleep here. Please don't spend the next 3 hours here. There's probably going to be a line of people.
Totally.
And you know, whether or not you like steal somebody's phone as part of the thing, you make them sacrifice the phone. I think that's interesting. I would also maybe poke at that a little bit. I was concerned when you like originally showed sort of the box and like the holder for it, that it kind of looks like something you would insert a phone into and it would just drop down into the bottom. Like it looks like sort of like a mailbox kind of a situation. So
yeah, that's fair.
I personally would be like, oh, I'm not putting my phone in that. So I would definitely want to know more and have that context of like, no, this really won't happen if you're not prepared to like give up your phone, and this is the benefit of it, and just like be here for 10 minutes and be present and de-stress and all of that context. But I think the execution is really nice. It definitely looks like a very soothing spot to hang out in.
thank you.
Thanks.
Alex, would you like to go ahead? We have a few minutes.
Okay. I think this is really great. I share some similar concerns, but I think overall, like you've spent a lot of time like thinking about this, and I think it's really strong. Like I honestly think that you could pitch this to festivals, and you know, I honestly think it has a lot of value, and the way that you've set it up is really great. I would say that this is kind of feedback for everyone in general, is that user experience of any kind of installation is actually as much of a important component and lift to figuring out how to make it work. And I think that like most of these projects, like, you know, you're at like working prototype stage, but actually the next phase, and if you want to keep working on these things, or you want to, you know, turn this into something else, that's the thing that like I feel that most people kind of need to dig a little deeper on. Because this feels really solid as a prototype. Like I think this is an amazing, you did a great job of presenting it. But yeah, like the phone privacy safety thing is like, you really have to double down on that stuff with people. So it's like, what are you doing with my phone? That little slot kind of, you know, my thought was that it plugged into the slot, not that it was going to disappear. And then I was like, oh, is there like a security or like a privacy concern there? And I think like the more that you can message people as part of the experience, so not like, oh, we're recording you or we're doing this or whatever, like how can you make it part of this, like there's a little thing on the wall that's like, do XYZ. I also think taking people's phones is a very well-known behavior of like meditations, silent retreats. It's a practice that exists in the kind of meditation, I mean, industry is a weird word, space, I suppose. So I think that you can kind of use that to put people at ease. And again, this, like, to Joanna's point, like, what are you going to get out of this? Here's the reason why you should give up this thing. I also think that if you want to go even further with this, you could make some kind of, you talked a lot about notifications in this kind of busy life, and what people are doing. And I wonder if the kind of like, you know, super extreme version of this is that there's some interactivity with the phone that is like turns the notifications into part of the landscape that's like makes you kind of realize that you know you're having this meditative moment, but like here's all the things that you know you would be getting alerted to. But I also think there's a lot of like really great timed meditation apps out there, and I think people are also used to this kind of behavior of like timed meditation. And so in terms of the like single user problem that you might be trying to solve in this actual real installation on your campus, is you could be like, okay, like maybe it's timed and there's a little singing bowl sound happens at the start once you make your selection of environment, and then it goes for 5 minutes and then you come out of it and then you've had this experience. Like that's a way that you kind of get things moving along. But yeah, I think just like really instructing people around how to behave and where to put their phone and why you're taking their phone and what they're going to get out of it and all that kind of stuff. But I thought that was a really strong presentation, and I feel like you could make this a sellable experience if that's something that you would be interested in, because I think it has a lot of potential to live in a lot of different places and be a portable thing that could move around and be quite beneficial at conferences, at brand activations, at festivals, at insert whatever, even campuses. You know, I think it has a lot of potential both as a meditative installation but also as a product.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Nice work, you two. Thank you so much. Well done.
Thanks.
I'll jump in too to say that with so many of these physical installations, I really commend all of our students for doing the best that they can with the campus being shut down. So in Nate and Elsa's case in particular, they had a specific room on campus they were working on. So I commend the two of you for being able at all to get any kind of documentation done. So well done on that too. So next up, we have WISP, Interactive Homeware Catalog. Jolie, you can go ahead and take over the screen.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here, guys. Let me get my presentation going. All right, can we see that okay? Hopefully, good stuff. All right, hi everybody. My name is Jolie. My project is called WISP. So what is WISP? Uh-oh, 1 second, sorry. Computer has frozen. Sorry about this, 1 second. Can someone maybe take me off for a second just because my screen's not working and maybe I need to force quit my computer? Thank you.
Is it worth us trying to kick over to the next presenter and give you a little time, Jolie?
Yeah, let me try it for one more just quick check and then we will see if it works again. All right, I think we're in business. Thanks, sorry about the interruption. So my project's called WISP. What is WISP? Well, WISP is a website that is an imagined interactive catalog for a futuristic homeware subscription service. I know that sounds a little vague, but hopefully we can clarify that throughout this presentation. This project emerged out of research that I've been doing through the Unstable Design Lab here at Atlas for the past 2 years about ASMR. ASMR stands for Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response, and it's a pleasurable tingling sensation that certain people can feel in response to various audiovisual stimuli. Typically, these stimuli are sounds like whispering, tapping on objects, opening a box, anything that's usually very quiet and detail-oriented. And there is a thriving sub-community of creators on platforms like YouTube, wherein a creator will make a video focused on one of these stimuli, such as whispering, or perhaps a video where somebody's tapping on an array of objects for a given amount of time. And these videos are created with the express intention of eliciting the ASMR sensation in others. Currently, there's very little known about ASMR scientifically as to what causes it or what exactly it is. So that was definitely a constraint with this project, but I was still interested in investigating it. And in terms of the previous work I did before starting the official Capstone sequence, I was looking into how ASMR can inform human-computer interaction, specifically if we can learn anything from it for the design of wearable technology. ASMR has a lot of alleged positive benefits, such as relaxation and mindfulness, and in general, it's just so popular that I was intrigued by it. And namely, it has very unique aesthetics and practices in terms of how the videos are made. And so I was interested in if we could apply those characteristics to the design of a wearable technology piece. And so I did that. I did an autobiographical design project alongside my mentor, Laura Devendorf, wherein we each created a garment for ourselves, where we tried to apply the aesthetic characteristics of ASMR onto it. So you can see I made this red jacket and she made this cloak, both of which will trigger audio playback in different ways if you use them. And we both found that using these ASMR garments helped us see our surroundings in a new way and focus on details and feel more mindful. So I was really excited by that, but kind of coming out of this project, I was a little bit curious about the bigger picture surrounding ASMR. I was so curious about why people were obsessed with something that was so slow and detail-oriented, when the pervasive aspects of the digital culture that it exists within seem to be completely the opposite. The internet is so fast-paced, headline-oriented, and overstimulating. I was wondering, could people be reacting against these aspects of digital life, and in turn setting a new precedent for interactions that are slower, simpler, more sensuously intricate, and detail-oriented? And if this paradigm shift could really be happening, how will that change the way that we live? And so in pondering these types of questions, it only seemed natural to turn towards speculative design. Speculative design is a school of thought that uses design and storytelling as a way to spark critical discussion about the future. In the words of the pioneers of speculative design, Dunn and Raby, speculative design isn't about trying to predict the future, but about using design to open up possibilities that can be discussed, debated, and used to collectively define a preferable future for a given group of people. And so, in the case of my project, what I really wanted to do was imagine what the future would look like if ASMR had become so commonplace that it was normal, and what kind of changes in the values and preferences of our society that would represent. So in a sense, I wanted to create an artifact from this future in the form of a website that could subtly reflect those different values and preferences. I began this design project, like most design projects do, by sketching and wireframing and creating mock-ups. And I think that the biggest challenge with speculative design projects for me is to aesthetically appear both real and unreal at the same time, to be different and strange enough from the present to invite imagination, but to also be plausible enough to encourage reflection and critical discussion about the present and the future that we're shaping. And so that was what I was kind of investigating, is how can I recreate the experience of online shopping to preference sound and texture, which was inspired by ASMR media, in a way that's odd and slightly challenging while still maintaining a foothold in our present reality. And what I found with these wireframes in showing them to mentors and friends and classmates is that they're just too similar to the current online shopping experience, and that the addition of sound and trying to focus on texture just felt like an odd afterthought that most people just might ignore. And so coming out of that, I tried to do a complete 180 and eliminate everything that's typical of the current online shopping experience, such as getting rid of descriptions, prices, reviews, and namely images, and just trying to represent products using visual and sonic abstractions to really focus on the sensory qualities of the objects. But unfortunately, within the scope of the capstone class, I just didn't have time to develop my animation skills enough to do the objects justice in a way that I felt realistic and plausible situated in this near future. And additionally, I just had a lot of issues creating animations that were robust enough, but at the same time weren't laggy. So in this one, I was trying to recreate the experience of using one of those sequin pillows where you can run your hands over the sequins and see different colors as you do that. In this one, and there should be sound, so be warned, it was a rug. I was trying to imitate a rug, and I just mapped basic tonal sounds to it to see if I could investigate kind of the sound animation relationship. Ooh. And so heading out of that, I was still really inspired by the animations, but I had to make some compromises, and I had to take a kind of hybrid approach of my earlier prototypes. And so what I did was reincorporated the idea of product photography, but I tried to go about that in a slightly unconventional way. Instead of using a plain white background, the objects are imposed over backgrounds that hold sensory meaning and description. So instead of a really laboriously well-written description that's going to talk about how the rough tines of this ginger grater make easy work preparing dinner, or describing the cool, luxurious touch of jade, the ginger grater is imposed over gravel, and the jade facial massage tool is imposed over ice. So now I'm just going to actually bring up the website and we can take a look at it. So yeah, as you can see, I have images for each product, and that's accompanied by a simpler animation that represents one part of the object. And when you mouse over the animation, a sound is played that is made by the object. And so yeah, it's a series of 5 products that are curated to kind of be this set of objects that all have sensory value and that are all intriguing in that way. And so yeah, that's my project. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who helped me and mentored me throughout this. And yeah, questions?
Nice work, Jolie. Thank you. Alex, would you like to go first this time?
Sure. I think this is super interesting. I'm really into speculative projects. I think that, I mean, I would like to know what your technical skill going into this was. Did you say that you're not an animator and you were teaching yourself animation, or as part of this project?
Yeah, so I have experience in web development and really basic P5 animations, and I was hoping to do more robust P5 animations, but it just wasn't happening. So my skills are more in like front-end web development than in animating.
And I guess my major question is, do you feel that this is just a speculative project and you were hoping to kind of uncover some of the like research provocations that you had gone into this with, or do you see a life for this as a real functioning product?
Definitely not as a real functioning product. I think the sense that I would love to imagine this in is situated in a gallery alongside other speculative projects that are another creator's interpretation of the same future, and that you could kind of walk around and interact with these different artifacts from that time. But obviously, you know, that's not really feasible right now. So it's, yeah. I think it's more fun to be interacting with it in a kind of more gallery setting.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly like the idea of it as a web-based project, like as a web-based art project. And I think that it has a lot of potential to kind of be something that's, you know, series based, and I think it also has a lot of value right now in this moment. I think it has a lot of value in general, but I think the investigation that you've done is really interesting, and I would love to see you kind of develop this further into something that kind of can be like a fully rounded experience, where it's like, hey, come to this website, and there's like, you enter, and then it's like, this is what's going to happen, and like, it's a little bit of like a, you know, like a web-based exhibition basically, because I think it's really interesting, and I would love to, I can imagine spending a lot more time with this, particularly within the framework of the like ASMR zone that everybody's in right now. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. But I would, one kind of small piece of feedback, I think, around the pairing of images with textures is, I think you have to be careful of how easy it is to slip into like slick product photography with those images. So like, to me, when you said the gravel thing, I was like, okay, cool, that makes sense now that you've explained it to me. But otherwise it looks like a perfectly executed product advertisement. So I would just kind of think a little more on how you might either play on that as a commentary, or you might detach yourself from what is like a very common way of presenting and performing products. Because I think you've gone like way the other direction from that, and I think you can critique it or throw it out the window, but I think you need to kind of sit more one way or the other. So I was like, oh wow, can totally imagine that grater being on a pile of gravel, like in some glossy magazine, you know? So I just kind of think about how you're triggering existing associations that people have with the way that information is presented to them already. But otherwise, great job.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alex. Joanna, we have a few minutes. Go ahead.
So I love this concept. I think there's so much fun you could have with it, because it is itself a very fun idea. I do think that the animations are not the way to go with like the ASMR vibe. You know, I think because you're not an animator, you could take advantage of like GIFs, like just taking little videos of those products in use, and sort of, because the thing with ASMR is, you know, part of the tingle is like the suggestion of what's going to happen. Like, you know that it's going to make a click, and then it makes a click. Like, just looking at ASMR on Giphy, there's a lot of crap, but there's a lot of stuff that suggests the sound, and that in itself gives you that ASMR vibe. IKEA made a really great ASMR ad that would be worth visiting if you haven't seen it before. But a lot of it is just like a narrator talking through the thing and welcoming you to the product. So even if you just had rollovers that were like, would you like to add to cart? Like, that's great. So I think there's lots of other ways that you can play with the ASMR and bringing that into this like really weird and wonderful e-commerce experience that aren't just about the products themselves. And then the other thing that I'd like to know more about is like, why home goods, and you know, what it is about like creating a home and like this cozy space or the tingly space that like makes you feel safe, and just taking it even further where it's like all the products are things that just like make you feel safe in some really weird way. And like the product descriptions are, you know, it's like, I mean, I have no idea if it's like a rug and you're like, it's the softest rug and it will do the, you can roll around on it when you feel like you just need to be a child and curl up, like whatever. Like you can really just like push it, which is the fun of doing a project like this, is like, it's like a little weird, like make it a lot weird. But I love that you have this, it's like so familiar though, like why not make it look exactly like an e-commerce site? Like it should be. I'm very excited about this. Keep going. I think you can dive very deep.
Thank you so much.
Nice work, Jolie. Thank you so much. So next up, we have In the Round. And Sarah, you can go ahead and take over.
Alrighty. So, hi everyone. My project is called In the Round. My name is Sarah St. Clair, and I love people. And over the last year, I started feeling incredibly isolated and like I was having a hard time really connecting with my peers. And I am studying sculpture. I'm getting a BFA as well as my TAM degree. And I started out making object-oriented sculptures. And then I started to combine my love of sculpture with my love of TAM, and I started moving into experience and installation. But the part that was missing was the people. So I wanted to explore how to engage with people in a piece of art. So my thesis project is a participatory sculpture and installation, and through the design of space, sound, and object, I created a space for participants to slow down and appreciate others of our own species. The piece exists as two semicircular benches that are 8 feet in diameter. There are 2 wooden steps which lead the participants to the top level, which is a padded upholstered seat. And in the seat, there are sensors which trigger sounds to play when a person sits down. And each sensor triggers one part of an 8-layer vocal harmony sung by me. And the circular shape of the seat draws the eyes in, focusing the participants' attention on what they as an individual contribute to the whole experience, and further, how their experience is enhanced when someone sits across from them. So my video documentation, due to most of the sculptural elements being trapped on campus, is a realization of the environment, sound, and connective interaction between participants. So this project was a big dive into the unknown for me. So I'm going to take you guys through the theoretical underpinnings and the research I did on space, form, and sound. So to start out, I looked at the Unity Temple designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. And in this building, I looked closely at how he stacked the pews vertically in the building instead of horizontally. And he did this because of the idea that by physically ascending into space, the churchgoer's mentality would reflect that physical ascension. And another key component from this building is Frank Lloyd Wright's use of art glass to filter in natural light. And so this created a really serene feeling and a strong connection to nature. So Next, I looked at furniture designers, specifically artists who made furniture, and this is the work of Donald Judd. And I looked closely at his ideas about how minimalistic design can increase the functionality of a piece of furniture. By not decorating, it can actually produce more productivity in a user. And then for the more experimental side of things, I looked at Andrea Zattel's work. And this is her experimental living space, one of them. And so this box transforms into this entire living space. And from her work, I was looking very closely at how objects can tell users everything they need to know through familiarity, scale, and object clarity. So from all of that, I landed on this final schematic. And here you can see the 2 wooden steps which lead to the top level, the upholstered seat. And within that seat, there are sensors which trigger the sounds that you hear. So this is the steps. This is the actual physical steps. And this is the other parts of the sculptural base, which is all unfortunately trapped in the studio on campus. So after that, I was just needing to figure out and work out all of the sound aspects of the piece. So I looked at the work of the Daily Two Le Jour, and this piece is called I Heard There Was a Secret Chord. And in the piece, viewers or participants walk into a space and the song Hallelujah is playing, and then they can pick up a microphone and hum or sing along. And it just encourages this feeling of connectivity to the other people around you and also the other people listening to that song. So from this and my other research, it culminated in this drawing that I made, which represents the 3 spaces vital to my piece. The physical space, which is represented by the rectangular gradient, the mental space, which is represented by the upward facing triangle, and the sonic space, the linear web, which is on top of both of these spaces. And as you can see, the sonic space permeates both the mental and the physical space. So thus, the sound in my installation had to reflect the physical and mental outcomes that I was hoping for, and those being harmonious human relationships and vulnerability. So the harmonious humanity is reflected in an 8-layer vocal harmony, and the vulnerability is offered by me as I am the one singing the actual harmony. So altogether, I created an environment using light, form, and sound, which encourages people to physically and mentally engage, connect, and revere those around them. Thank you so much. Are there any questions?
Nice work. Thank you so much, Sarah. We seem to be alternating. I can't remember who went last. Alex, would you like to go first?
Sure. I think I'd like to understand a little more about this may not have been intentional, but there's kind of an interesting almost religious, and that may just be in space and inspiration kind of aspect to what you're describing, and the reference of the Frank Lloyd Wright building, as well as the art piece that you referenced. And I'm kind of interested to understand a little more about why those things are important to this piece. If it's just kind of like spatial design and that's really more the interest, or if there is a relationship between the kind of performance or gathering or religious kind of sentiment that I maybe was picking up on, or maybe that's just a coincidence.
No, totally. Yeah, I took a lot of inspiration from these sort of spiritual contexts because I think they reference really well transcending your usual thought processes. And so, although my piece isn't religious or spiritual in nature, I wanted to sort of take the formalities from these widely practiced scenarios and use them to my own personal advantage for getting people to think past, their traditional thought patterns. And, I wanted people to really meditate on what it is that another individual is adding to their own personal experience in a space, and just to revere another person like they would like fine art objects or like a spiritual higher power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's super interesting. And again, like I think it comes down to the next piece of this that you haven't had a chance to uncover because your sculpture is trapped. But I think it's also, a lot of this again comes down to user experience. And I think getting people to behave in a way in an installation where they become aware of their participation relevant to others, aware of the technology in a way that is the way that you intend, can often be really challenging.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes you have to guide people through the technology, sometimes you have to guide people through the space, and sometimes you have to guide people through the way that you instruct them to show up. I think there's a little more investigating to do in terms of, because something you said just then about the way that they might revere another person in relation to their own, spatial participation. I don't know if that would be immediately obvious to a participant in the way that you kind of like described this prototype, but I think it's super compelling. So I think for you, I think the next kind of thing to dig into is how can you ensure that people have that experience of knowing that they're participating with someone else and that their participation and relevance to the other person is impactful and part of the experience that they should be having. And I think that's like super tricky, and lots of things, lots of installations don't do the work that needs to be done in order to have that kind of response. But I think hold on to what you said, because I think that's your kind of motivation behind this, and I think it's very compelling. But I think it's also like takes a lot of behavioral testing, user testing in situ to kind of establish what people's behavior. And it's like, oh, did you realize that how you were relating to someone else, or did you just think that you were participating in this way? And I think it's okay for people to have lots of different experiences, and not everyone is going to realize that. But I think it's just something to kind of continue to think about, because I think, yeah, what you said there really hit it on the head, but just maybe needs a little further investigation. But it's nice. Well done.
Thank you.
So Joanna, we have a couple minutes. Go ahead.
So I think this is a really lovely piece. And I think to Alex's point, like your motivation is clear. And I think it's the execution part, I think will definitely take a lot of user testing, which I realize you do not have access to right now. It reminded me of Janet Cardiff's piece. Are you familiar with Janet Cardiff at all?
No, I'm not.
Look into Janet Cardiff's 40-part motet. It's not interactive the way that your piece is, but it is very much about harmony and about having like a transcendent experience in a way. And I've experienced it twice, and I'm not religious, and it's just like, it's made me cry both times. It's insane. And it's all about how you hear 40 individual voices from 40 different speakers. And when they come together, it's just like totally mind-blowing. I think looking into like what harmony really does, why it needs to be your voice, and what you want people to feel will help you get to the next level. Like, I love that you thought about how the actual, the layout of the space is going to get you there. I think that the audio part is the next piece, because I don't think it's enough to just create like general harmonies when people are sitting down. You will immediately have a kid realize that when they sit down and get up again, that it affects what's going on, which might be great or might be like the complete opposite of what you want. So exploring that further, I think will yield great things, because it's clear that you have the artist intent, and I think you'll get there and make a successful piece.
Awesome, thank you.
Nice.
Nice work, Sarah. Thank you so much. So next up, we have the encroaching fog of language. Xavier, you can go ahead and take over.
Okay. Okay, hi, my name's Xavier, and my project's entitled The Encroaching Fog of Language. It began with a photo series I made last year dealing with abstracting language, and I arrived at that idea after coupling text and imagery in a lot of my work leading up to it. So the photo series is about the possibilities and flexibility of words, highlighting the emotional and intellectual impact they have on us. So each photo in the series consists of 3 elements: a background, text, and a border. The backgrounds are images I've taken, and I had about 19 coming into the project. The text is the anchor of each image, and there's a lack of direct meaning inherent to the poems that emphasizes the individual qualities of each word rather than the totality of the words. And paired with the images, they can suggest certain moods and express feeling while provoking thought. The formatting highlights the non-meaning of the words, and it gives the series its own sort of recognizable visual language itself. The borders are meant to harken back to like analog photographs, the white border around like a Polaroid, and their regularity plays with structure, mirroring how the words in the images are deconstructing language. And the combination of the two is meant to draw attention to structures of linguistic and visual communication we normally view as invisible. So the ultimate goal of the series is to spur an engagement with original thought and challenge one's preconceived notions about language. That mentality stems from a quote by William S. Burroughs, where he states that conventional patterns of perceiving, thinking, and speaking determine our interactions with society and the world at large. So for Burroughs, he views language as the lens through which we perceive our world, and by distorting that lens, it allows us to access different modes of thinking. So that's what I was trying to accomplish with my own work. And when making the original series, I would often use random word generators to spark ideas. And so my capstone was just about taking that a step further and generating the entire image instead of just the words, or just portions of the words. Going into the project, I envisioned it as an installation accompanied by a book of printed images, and each spread would contain one generated and one non-generated image as a means of comparing handmade with artificially made work. And as a whole, the project is meant to be an extension of the original photo series, so it would raise the same questions regarding the invisible structures of language and how it dictates our lives, while simultaneously introducing new concepts surrounding the efficacy of digital art, whether a script can produce work on the same level of emotional and intellectual impact as a person, and if so, what becomes the role of the artist in this new paradigm where they're no longer necessary to make art. So I'm essentially supplanting my own role in making these images by doing the capstone. My initial inspirations, like I mentioned earlier, came from Burroughs and other cut-up poets who use clippings from magazines, newspapers, and books to arrange arbitrary groupings of words to create new meanings. And on the digital side, I looked at the work of John Vega and digital artists who use scripts to generate visual works of art. After reaching out to different mentors, I discovered language poetry, which was a movement in the 1970s about deconstructing language. So story and reason were absent from language poems, and it forced readers to approach the text in different ways. And it was about the meaning readers generated while viewing the work rather than the work presenting a meaning to them. And it demonstrates that words dictate meaning rather than the other way around. And that mirrors a lot of the sentiment I had when developing this project. And on the right, we have one of the earliest examples of generative poetry, which draws from a select pool of words and rearranges them infinitely, resulting in a number of different combinations. And that's fairly similar to how my early prototypes functioned. So I built the entire project using P5.js, and Rita.js was my main word bank library. To construct the first prototype, I examined my existing work, and then I broke down the patterns of formatting and syllables within each line of each poem, and then I applied those as rules to the script. So in each image, only one word is crossed out, and up to one word has spaces. And the frequency of certain types of formatting and syllable count is dependent on the line number. So the first prototype focused on just generating words and applying the formatting to them in ways that was mirroring the original series. But those were just based purely on syllable count, the words I was generating. So in the second prototype, I was using seed words to generate words similar to them. So that way it gave each poem a bit of cohesion like it did in the original series. And by the third iteration, I was just pairing them with the images and then generating the borders. And from there, it was just about refining the process of generating the words. So I had some time to experiment with different ideas to alter the direction of the project, like adding seed words based on the image, pulling words from live sources like Twitter, or applying machine learning to get different outcomes. But ultimately, those ideas produced results that didn't align with my intentions for the project, so they ended up falling through. Instead, the final script uses WordNick alongside Rita.js for a more robust set of words, and various restrictions are in place to add polish to the overall generated images. So there's a limit on line length, so the words never extend beyond the square that contains them, and the script takes into account which image it's generating the words for, so that background elements don't interfere with the words too much and makes them hard to read. Yeah, so that's pretty much the generative script in its final iteration. And I took about 6 more pictures for the base series, bringing the total to 25 before I generated about 1,000 using the generative script in its final version. And then I chose the best 25 from those and printed them in the photo book, which I did end up getting printed, and it turns out pretty much how I expected it to. And the final version of the generative script can be seen running on the documentation page. So I'll just let this run for a bit, and if you have any questions, but thanks for listening.
Nice work, thank you. So we'll let it run for a moment, and Joanna, would you like to get started?
Sure. So I'm sorry if I missed this at the beginning, but what are the sources of the images? Are these photographs you're taking, or the images?
Yeah, they're just pictures I took.
Gotcha. Okay, so I am fascinated by the sort of generative approach to the language and sort of the poetry that you're creating there. I think that's awesome. I would love for the images to also be generative. I love the idea of creating a book that makes itself. I think that's super cool. I think the concept's amazing. I'm interested in sort of the way that machine learning, like you can teach it, and it's all based on like the sources of the source of the stuff that you put in it. So I'm curious, I want to know more about like what the source is, like why it's that stuff, why that's the important stuff, especially especially with language, but also with the images, like why those things need to be paired. I also think it gets into like why art books are a thing, and who gets to have art books, and it kind of like touches on some of that. So I think this is a super cool proof of concept, and I love that you managed to get it printed. It's great. I'm getting into the weeds now in terms of like why there's a grid, and also like really what the visuals are, like what that relationship is, because you're making the connection by showing the words against an image. So like why those images? Let's start there. Sorry, I asked so many like weird meandering things.
Yeah, well basically, like I said, I started the project last summer just sort of organically, because I took some images and then I just put words on top of them. And then as I started developing the series, I wanted to move into more abstract images. Mm-hmm. And it was basically just about, when I was making the original series, I would just take an image and then I would write words that I thought suited the tone of the image, and it conveyed a sort of meaning by reading mm-hmm. the words with the image. And in the generator, I tried to mimic that, but it's much harder to do just by randomly generating words without like making it too limited. So yeah, the generator is more just about like viewing different words together and seeing how it produces feeling from the image.
I think that's great. And I'm glad that you're doing that. And I think that's a great exploration. I think what's important, the next step there then is understanding what those relationships are. Is there a theme? Are you more drawn to dark images over light? Is it more about nature, or is it about, you know, whatever, city settings? And why is it one versus the other? And how does that change the language? And because really good art meets people halfway, right? So it's like, I need to know what your intent is, and then I can apply a bunch of what my intent is, because you can't control that. That's just sort of how it goes. So I think I'm missing some of that, like what you want me to get out of it, outside of these are relationships, like why do they matter to you? Yeah, but I think this is really fascinating.
I'm not sure. I think I just have an interest in language as it is. And I think really the point of this project is just to highlight language as a concept, almost just by making you view it in a different way. So I'm not sure there's any meaning I wanted to get across specifically, other than just like pay attention to this and what are you getting from it.
So Alex, would you like to jump in?
Yeah. I have some, you know, similar kind of feedback. I think if that is the case, you know, my question was around this kind of relationship between either the images and the text, or the parameters for the generator, or the relationship of what the text reveals about the technology that you've used to build it. Because I think often in these kind of like generative projects where it's like, oh, a bot writes you know, an essay, it's like really trying to critique something more about the technology than it is being so concerned with the outcome. And so I think hearing you say that your focus is more on drawing attention to language itself, I would almost say that the images could be removed, because I think what you're creating is really like, you know, poetry or language as imagery. And I think the imagery maybe confuses that relationship a little, because I think, you know, you said something when you were presenting that was that like you tried a couple of different approaches and it didn't really turn out the way you wanted. And that signaled to me that you're not on the path of, you know, you're not trying to critique something about the technology. You're not trying to make a commentary about the words themselves or how or why they're generated or what goes into that. But really more you're kind of presenting them for consideration and contemplation. And so I think that perhaps the images are a little distracting because they're not necessarily related to that. And I think if I was viewing these words as kind of like visual poems, or, you know, poems as art or whatever it might be, I would have less of these questions. But I think because you've framed it so much around language and, you know, the kind of generation of these words and the parameters that you've used, it feels like an exercise in technology more than it feels like an exercise in kind of just thinking through the way that we use language for function. And it sounds like you're trying to draw more attention to its unrelated beauty and how it can still be a recognizable thing. It becomes a component rather than a sentence, for example. So I think there's just like some unpacking there to do. I mean, I think it's gorgeous and beautiful, and I think it's really interesting, the kind of the way that you've gone about approaching this project. But I think there's just a couple of things to be aware of, and you kind of alluded to this history of how artists have worked with this before, how people have worked with kind of generators and bots and different things like that. But I would just be kind of cognizant of those things in terms of how you're presenting this.
Yeah, thanks.
Nice work. Thank you so much. This was the first time I was seeing this project since last semester. It's always a great surprise to see that kind of work. So nice job. Very exciting. Next up, this is the last in our group. We have Call to Truth. Laura, you can go ahead and take over.
Hey guys, thanks for coming. So this is, let me get my screen set up. Let's see. So hi, yeah, my name is Laura. I'm a senior. This is my senior capstone thesis, Call to Truth. Call to Truth is a piece of modern religious art exploring the challenges faced in pursuing a life of faith and education. This piece was created using cherry wood, aluminum, gold leaf, and steel. When I first started thinking about a capstone project, I was like, well, a capstone is sort of a summation of all the things that I've learned at CU. So what are those things? And I think on the very first level, I've learned a lot of very tangible skills that have provided me with a fantastic job for after graduation. And I'm very thankful for that. However, I've also spent a lot of time here at CU diving into philosophy and theology and politics and economics, and it's been a different sort of cultivation of the life of the mind that I was very formative in. I think the highest thing that I've learned at CU, which ultimately was my decision to convert to Catholicism my junior year. This was a very big personal movement, and so I sort of had this context of, yes, CU has been very academic, but it's also been a huge place for personal growth, and so I wanted to think about that. And so in considering what my capstone course or project would consist of, I was sort of reflecting that I hadn't made very many material things. I'd made a lot of digital things that you could find on websites, but I wasn't super proud of any of them, and I really wanted to, yes, summarize things that I had learned before, but also to build new skills and new experiences. And so last year around this time, I'm thinking about what do I want to do? And I walk into the Smithsonian Museum of Art in Washington, D.C., and I see this piece, which is, gosh, I think like 10 feet across. It's the Adoration of Saint Joan of Arc, who also is my confirmation saint. And it just totally blew me away with the simplicity of the material, yet also with the extravagance of the size. It just completely enveloped me. And I knew that I wanted to try my hand at this sort of pyrography and metal inlay thing. So starting from there, I sketched out a few ideas. I said, okay, well, if it's more of like a personal exploration of what I've learned, I think the main three challenges that I've come across in both my faith life and my experience becoming more academically inclined was a lack of ownership, total autonomy, and then finally, the sort of fear of the final step, which I'll get into later. So I developed this imagery into that of sailing. It's a metaphor that is both consistent with biblical teaching as well as something that's a very close personal story to my own life. My last name actually means sailor, so I've created all these fun stories in my head to go along with that. Anyway, so the actual building process itself required many, many hours of woodworking, putting together 7 cherry panels and jointing them with these like cute little things called biscuits. I learned so much in this process, and especially that wood is a very personal, or it has a lot of personalities, which meant with that, after the glue up phase, getting it all put together, we had to then create steel beam reinforcements to go on the back so that as humidity or temperature changes in the future, that it'll be like it won't warp or anything. I got it all set up. This picture was taken aptly at 3 a.m. With a deadline, I think. Next, I put in sort of the general shapes that the inlays are into Rhino 3D modeling software, and then transported this like 120-pound wood thing down to a lab on East Campus that has a CNC router large enough. That was one of the biggest challenges, was just finding a machine that I could put this thing on. And both cut out the divots for the wood as well as made the outline for the aluminum to place down. The next project, and thankfully to COVID-19, I got to bring it home, and I had roommates who were kind enough to let me take up the entire living room with this thing, as well as a living room that's big enough for it. And so the next process was starting to get all the sketches in. I thought I was gonna sort of template it on with carbon paper, but there was an issue with that. So I was just freehand drawing basically everything, all of the imagery, which you'll see very soon. And this was a challenge because I don't do a lot of figure drawing. This was the point where I realized, like, wow, I wanted to learn something, but I have not done very much art in my life, which was, it was just so fun, and it was a huge learning curve. So started doing the main outlines of pyrography, because I haven't done a lot of that before either, getting the basic sort of mechanics of it down. And you'll note, at first I thought I was going to dye the aluminum with a gold patina, but I didn't read the directions with the chemicals, which is a really important step. So I ended up corroding the aluminum, which you can see like right here, which meant I kind of had to pivot and use gold leaf instead to cover up that. But I actually like it better because the texture is nice. So finally, after all that, with the detailing and covering it in the correct like stain and sealant and everything, or the outlines, more outlines of the figures themselves. Oh, and you get to see like 40 hours of my life look like in the form of, if this will work, please work, there we go. Yeah, it was a very meditative process and slow. There were tons of different nibs that you could use to get different details and temperatures. You could burn really fast or burn really slow, depending on how much sort of texture that you wanted. But I think I also gave myself many migraines with the amount of smoke that I inhaled. So finally, this is the end result with all of the panels in it and such. It's 5 feet tall, 3 feet across. It consists of 7 boards. It's about 120 pounds. And my intent for this piece is to actually be donated to the Catholic Student Center, which is just off campus where a lot of my conversion actually happened. There's a sweet coffee shop that just facilitated a lot of conversations that kind of guided me down this path. And as far as the imagery goes, we can go into that next. So there's first the lack of ownership. So sort of the danger of being guided by other people. There's like too many cooks in the kitchen, essentially. And I think we all have a responsibility to our own lives. We all know if we listen to ourselves, the narrative that we should be living, and we know what's good for us. But I think it's really easy to get distracted with, in education, whether that's advisors who think you should be some sort of major that you're not, or you know, in faith, just following things that aren't really should be part of your story. So taking an ownership for your own story is sort of the solution to that. The second challenge, total autonomy, really, is yes, you should have ownership over your own life, but we are not completely autonomous individuals. That's mostly also represented in the fact that this individual is missing a sail, the wind being sort of these guiding forces that propel us, whether or not we have control of them. And our job is to respond to them more than it is to be completely dictatorial of the space that we're going into. In education, it's kind of like saying you don't know what you don't know. So we have to submit ourselves to some professor or person who has done this before that we can trust. And that sort of lack of trust is the danger of this second figure. And finally, the third figure is this person that, yes, they have they have ownership of their own life, but they're also willing to submit to the forces that be. But at the same time, it's a terrifying thing to look at and to realize what you're made for, and to look at what you're capable of, and to still take that next step into the void and out to sea. It's a hard world no matter what you do, but this step is necessary regardless. So, and then of course, with the Christian themes, it doesn't matter what the issue is per the individual on the boat. There is there's a crucifix on each one of the boats, since Christ is like the person willing to submit himself to be the sort of propelling individual that walks before you in anything. So this is where Drogo's Coffee Bar if you're interested in visiting it ever. I've yet to transport it to the actual shop, so that'll be within the next few months or whatever when this COVID thing is over. Also, it's really inexpensive, and I work there, so it's like delicious coffee. But thank you to the Atlas staff who gave me not only the tools to get a great job, but also this freedom to do sort of a different kind of project. The St. Thomas Aquinas Student Center, where so much of the important things that I learned here happened. Father Peter Mussett, who of course was the mouthpiece for a lot of that. Josh Cohen, who mentored my woodworking, and without him this would not be possible. and then Rachel Vander Merwe, who really helped me think through sort of the iconography of the whole thing. So questions, and if you don't get to them now, you can see it on my blog at lmurray.com. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. Seeing as this is our last project of the group, Joanna or Alex, I'll let you guys decide. Do either of you want to go first? Joanna,
Okay.
yeah,
I'm happy to jump in. So I think this is lovely. I think you did a great job of explaining, how you arrived here, your process. It's very detailed. It's clearly a very personal project. So I have nothing to argue with or question there. I think for me, one of the big questions I have is like, how are they going to hang up like a 120-pound thing? And like, what's your plan for that? And where's it going to go? So I'd love to know more about, like, given that it is this really personal thing, I mean, it sounds like you have a personal connection to the coffee shop, but like, why is the coffee shop the appropriate place for it? And just kind of knowing a little bit more about that. But otherwise, it looks great.
That's great. And as you were talking, I was like, oh, I forgot to say all of those things. Yeah, so the reason why the coffee shop is going to be the home is this is a reflection of my own story. Like, I speak from the story that I have experienced, but I also speak from a reflection on witnessing other people's journeys and witnessing sort of a common narrative among my classmates and my fellow I guess just my fellow classmates and students and things. And so the story is both it's supposed to be a message, sort of like something that you reflect upon as an individual, and maybe the narrative that I wrote into it is not necessarily the narrative that will speak to others about it, but I think art has this beautiful way of showing us things that like empirical science can't. And that's sort of just a theory of like the art overall, is it's not just like what I've written into it is not dictatorial of what can be read out of it, and I want to provide a place where students can hear something that needs to be heard, where they can receive a message that needs to be spoken to them. So that's sort of why it's going to go at the coffee shop. There is a place that I have in mind that I've spoken to Father Peter about, where it actually, one of the doors, you walk straight in and you can see it. It's like a side door. It's not going to be like front and center of anything because they have their own artwork and everything, but it's sort of off near some of the offices that are by the bathrooms, and it receives a lot of natural light, which is good for the metallic component of that. And then also there are big screw hooks on the back of it and the reinforcements with wiring that then can be attached to the beams, like the wood beams in the wall, can support that much weight for sure. They can support a lot more than that. So.
Thanks, Laura. And then Alex, would you like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I have a huge amount to add to that. I think that, you kind of answered my question in terms of how this might apply more broadly, because I think that, the detailed description that you gave is not usually a level of detail that you have the privilege of understanding about why an artist has chosen to execute in the way that you have. So yeah, I think it's nice to know that there is some crossover with your experience for kind of observational experience of other people's journey and how this might kind of be applicable, because I think it really is that, what people are going to take away from this is an interpretation of this piece through their own lens. And so I think that is, it's good to kind of have that relevance. One thing I would say is that I don't know if I was fully clear on why you chose the kind of materials and processes that you chose, or the connection that they had to the kind of what you wanted to communicate, beyond the kind of reference point that you had, because I think they're interesting, and I think it's great that you kind of embarked on a lot of this like exploration of process for yourself, but yeah, I think I would like to understand a little more about the material choices relevant to like the end result.
Mm-hmm. Do I have time to answer that, Shiva?
Yes, before you do though, I just want to say that we do have a question also from the attendees asking if you could speak a little bit to some of the symbolism. And then in addition to that, specifically the mountains, sun, moon, and male-female figures. All of that being said, you have 1 minute, so go ahead.
I'll start. I'll just answer the materiality or the Alex's question first, and there's more details on my blog that you can look into. I think part of what was sort of the graphic that I showed of all the courses that I'd taken, and most of which had been digitally based, was this desire to communicate something that had a very specific place. Wood is something that is around us all the time. Like, you can't just like move it, you can't compact it, you can't, like, if it's a big structure, it just commands a place. And I think having done so many digital products, I was sort of frustrated with the impermanence of the messages that were being communicated digitally. And so I wanted to sort of engage with both the simplistic and natural components that wood brings with that presence, if that makes sense. So.
Yeah, nice.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So one more round of applause. Laura, thank you so much. Great job. So that concludes this session of our capstone projects. I'd like to just take a moment to say to all of the students, I'm so proud of all of you. This was a really rough time especially for physical projects in particular. And so I feel like all of you really handled it incredibly well. I'd also like to say thank you again to Joanna and Alex for taking the time to be with us. We'll do one more round of applause for everybody. It's a great session. Thank you so much for everything. So we'll be on pause until the next session, which will be starting at 5 o'clock. So Joanna and Alex, thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Shiva.
Yeah, thanks,
Great
guys.
job, everyone.
Nice work. Bye, guys. Oh, wait, I'm on mute. Thanks for having me.